So I'm following up a very excellent detailing of the history of policing in this country, and I'm going to be talking about community control of the police. Quick show of hands, how many of you have heard of that term, community control of the police? Okay, about 50%, 40%, not too bad. All right, so I want to start off with just a simple definition. So what is community control of the police? Well, the name, it implies exactly the meaning, right? It's pretty straightforward. So community control is a political framework and democratic demand arising out of the Black liberation movement specifically. It says that local communities, particularly historically oppressed communities, should have the power, the full control over who polices them, how they're policed, and so forth, right? And this includes things, policies and procedures, hire and fire capabilities, budget and finances, you name it, okay? Go ahead to the next one. All right, so this is a quote from Bobby Seale, a member of the Black Panther Party. It says, "We will have neighborhood divisions with neighborhood councils who are duly elected in the particular neighborhoods. The point of community control of the police is that those people living in those neighborhoods will actually do the hiring and firing of the patrolmen who patrol that area. Community control of the police is one of the most functional and most necessary programs to make all other programs work." All right? So kind of like Kasi was saying, the formation of the Black Panther Party was a very pivotal moment in the struggle for Black liberation. And of course, the Black Panther Party wasn't just a Black liberation group. They organized wide coalitions with other forces in the community that were fighting for justice, whether it was against the Vietnam War and other issues at the time, gay liberation and so forth. And so that last little bit, if we can go back really quick, I just want to harp on this. It says community control of the police is one of the most functional and most necessary programs to make all the other programs work. So throughout my presentation, I want us to kind of keep that in the back of our mind, right? Like Kasi was saying, whether it's people struggling for better wages and working conditions, people rising up against the powers that be, other injustices that are going on, having control over the police is a very fundamental way to ensuring that those gains remain in place and that they aren't able to be taken back by the powers that be. Okay? So again, just to talk about the origins of the demand of community control, right? We see it in a very embryonic form during Reconstruction, where we have Union soldiers enforcing the Reconstruction amendments, such as the Klan Act, which outlawed the Ku Klux Klan and effectively destroyed it within a matter of years. The right to vote, all these sort of democratic rights that were gained at the time. But in recent times, the demand for community control of police can be traced back to the Black Panther Party in the late 1960s. And it really got off the ground with their 1971 campaign for community control of the police in Berkeley, California. They had tried to do this in a couple other cities in the Bay Area in California, but Berkeley was the one that really took the lead here. So what they tried to do is have a ballot proposal that was, again, spearheaded by the Black Panther Party, but in coalition with a lot of other forces, student groups, anti-war groups, etc., engaging local officials, what have you. They called for a police commission that would be elected by the people, right? Again, enforcing that democratic aspect of policing, that people in these neighborhoods should have a say over how they are policed. It would be elected neighborhood review boards with strong investigative powers, and it also required officers to live in the areas which they patrolled. I'm sure folks, you're in your neighborhood, you might see, for example, in my neighborhood, I see an officer from Oviedo, what have you, right? Just not the location that I live in, right? And with this campaign, they were able to win approximately 1/3 of the electorate in that election, which unfortunately, right, is not enough for it to pass. And then in that aftermath, we also see the proliferation of these sham review boards, which we are very familiar with here in Florida. Cities across the country were establishing these review boards as basically a replacement, a substitution for community control, basically saying that you could have a little bit of say, but at the end of the day, you can't investigate open cases, couldn't subpoena officers, hire and fire, anything like that, disciplinary action, that was out of the question. They were just for review. And so I want to quickly have a quote. This is Frank Chapman. He's the executive director of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. For a little biography about him, he was arrested when he was very young, I believe 17, and basically had to fight for his freedom from behind prison doors. He fought his case, eventually won, and gained his freedom, and became an active organizer in the movement for Black liberation and the struggle for community control. He helped found the National Alliance, was very active in the original NARPR, and then again helped refound it in 2019. So it says, so one of the critical lessons learned was that because of the repression of the movement in Berkeley, there wasn't a stable coalition of community-based Black and left-led organizations, oppressed communities of color, faith-based organizations, and organized labor capable of relating to many different issues with a long-range perspective. So really what he's getting at is that, again, this, the 1971 campaign was one of the first steps towards actually getting community control. And, as we know, try one thing the first time, it might not work out, and we have to draw lessons from that. And what he gained was that the coalition wasn't wide, right? It was a very small, narrow sector of the movement, whereas in order to proliferate the movement and actually win community control, one of the lessons learned was that the front needed to be broad and unite many different people who, again, are connected to this issue of policing because, we see the police enforcing restriction on people's rights, breaking up strikes, suppressing people, patrolling communities, acting as an armed wing of the state. Okay? So around that time, you kind of see the epicenter for community control shifting from the Bay Area and the West Coast towards Chicago. We again see the proliferation of political prisoners, right? Keep in mind at the time, there are a lot of people rising up against the system, supporting national liberation movements, fighting for gay rights, everything that you can think of. It was a very, very tumultuous time in the United States, and people were being repressed because of it, right? Angela Davis was one that was mentioned, right? Longtime figure in the Black liberation movement. She was a political prisoner. I can think of personally a lot of people fighting for Puerto Rican independence were also arrested and suppressed by the government. And so at that time, people were thinking, how do we deal with this? And one of the ways that they resolved on doing that was to found a national alliance. And that national alliance was built around the foundation of fighting racist and political repression. And it was founded in 1973. At their founding conference, they resolved to make the struggle for community control a national focus. And we see NARPR chapters being established across the country, fighting for community control. And the Chicago branch specifically launched a campaign, CCOP, which stands for the Community Control of the Police campaign. And they formed a broad multinational coalition, which included the Black Panther Party, the Alliance to End Repression, the NAACP, the League of Black Women, and so forth. Right? Chicago Peace Council, the American Indian Movement, we can go on. It was a very, very broad front. At that time, too, I also want to mention, with that initial campaign in Chicago, they found that merely electing people into office was not necessarily the road to liberation, right? They elected progressive aldermen like the former Young Lords activist Cha-Cha Jimenez and Bobby Rush. But again, the real power they recognize lies with the people and not just electing one or two people into office. And so they, some lessons that were learned, the struggle continues. We see an important step towards community control being seen with what is called the Empowering Communities for Public Safety Ordinance. This was passed in Chicago in July of 2021. And the way they basically got there was following the murder of a 22-year-old woman named Rekia Boyd. This is a picture of her in 2012. The Chicago chapter of the National Alliance began a campaign for an all-elective Civilian Police Accountability Council, or CPAC. This included, again, broad coalition building, this time particularly emphasizing organized labor. So labor unions like the Chicago Teachers Union, SEIU, Jobs with Justice, as well as faith organizations. I can also think of, there's a group in Chicago called Good Kids Mad City, which is focused on organizing Black youth and supporting their demands. And There was also a lot of mobilization around the time. I know the name is cut off, but this is Laquan McDonald. He was a 17-year-old boy who was killed by a Chicago police officer, Jason Van Dyke. And as a result of that work at the time, right, in the 2010s, the CPAC ordinance was actually introduced into City Council, which was a massive step forward. They were able to fire the superintendent of the police. They fired the corrupt state attorney, ousted her in an election. The mayor, Rahm Emanuel, who was very corrupt and hated by the people, was forced to resign. And the killer cop, Jason Van Dyke, who murdered Laquan McDonald, was indicted, convicted, and sent to jail. So very, very big win. There we go. And in that time as well, right, in 2019, the National Alliance was again refounded and reestablished as a national organization. And this kind of laid the groundwork for the mass uprising that we saw in 2020 with the George Floyd rebellion. Okay, there at the refounding conference, there was around 1,200 people, 150 different organizations from 101 cities, representing 28 different states. There's a lot of people there ready to form a united organization fighting for police accountability and community control. And that experience of organizing in oppressed communities, working class communities, through things like tabling, canvassing, phone banking, really grassroots stuff, they were able to form a coalition called the ECPS, or Empowering Communities for Public Safety Coalition. This was formed between two different campaigns, right? The CPAC campaign merged with another campaign going on at the time called the Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability. And they merged their forces together to form ECPS and get an ordinance passed, which was a massive step towards community control. One of the things that was established in this ordinance was a community commission on public safety and accountability. They also established district councils in all 22 police districts with 3 positions in each district for a total of 66 positions. And this basically served or made a vehicle for which people could assert their demands and their rights to justice, particularly survivors of police violence, their families, and so forth. Now, of course, in Florida, we do have some roadblocks to community control of the police, and as OAPC, we've kind of encountered some of these roadblocks through our organizing this year. The main one that is blocking the path to true community control is that the scope and power of civilian review boards has been severely limited in the state of Florida. So, as I said earlier, we can't investigate or discipline, change policies or procedures. The review boards can't subpoena officers, ask them questions, bring them in to testify and so forth. And many of these civilian review boards that existed at the time, like the one that was established by the city of Orlando following the murder of Rodney King, they were dismantled as a result of a Republican-backed bill called HB 601 passed last year. The important thing to know about this law is that it didn't require localities to abolish a review board. It just further limited their scope. Well, a lot of cities and localities like the city of Orlando went ahead and just got rid of it entirely so that they didn't have to have any repercussions from DeSantis and the state government. One of the other things that we see in Florida is FDLE, investigations. I put it in scare quotes. I like the way that Connor puts it. It's like arsonists putting out fires. You can't have police investigating other police, even if they are from a separate agency, FDLE, which operates at the state level, as opposed to a body like the Orange County Sheriff's Office or OPD. As David also points out, a lot of times officers, once they're done with being a local sheriff, they'll rise up into FDLE. So there is a direct connection between our local police agencies and the state police agency. And finally, one of the most contentious things that we do have to deal with here in Florida is a statute known as the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. 24 different states across the country have a Leo Bore statute in their state constitution, and it basically seeks to protect officers for actions taken during their, quote, official acts of duty through procedural safeguards and a whole list of exceptions and protections that don't apply to us regular folk, right? I'm a teacher. If I injure somebody, if I do anything wrong, I get fired, no questions asked, right? But if a police officer shoots and kills an innocent person in their house, well, we can't do anything, right? So these are kind of the things that are preventing us from having community control, but I do want to emphasize the fact that a lot of this stuff was also present in a place like Chicago, which was able to pass this ordinance. And it took a lot of work, coalition building, getting in at the grassroots, talking to people, canvassing frequently and regularly, being a face in the community, and building a movement, bringing people together in order to fight for a common cause. And so I want to leave you guys with a very important quote that really, I think, hits the nail on the head about what community control really means. And it's again from Frank Chapman. And it says, quote, "We must give leadership and educate the people to the fact that community control is the only pathway," and notice he says pathway, "to ending police tyranny and police repression of our movements, therefore giving us the organizing space for our movements that our movements need for bringing about the systemic changes that are necessary precondition for the liberation of our people." Okay, so with that being said, community control is an issue that Orlando Against Police Crimes is dedicated around, about organizing around, and we hope that this kind of teaches you a little bit about what that means, why we're fighting for it, and why it's so important in terms of building actual people power that can fight the system that be and hold police accountable for their actions that take place. So that's all I have.